1844, before the introduction of formal pediatric care, one of the first general hospitals was established in Northampton, England. We are here to investigate the stories of the children that occupied the hallowed rooms of this hospital. Behold! Bodies Through Time, investigating children's health histories in the Northampton General Infirmary!
Thank you for that dramatic introduction, right? Very impressive. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. The purpose of Bodies Through Time is to investigate the Northampton General Hospital archives to explore the health experiences of children in Northampton, United Kingdom from 1744 to 1847, contributing unique longitudinal insights into the history of poverty, childhood, and social welfare. To transcribe these archival documents, which had not been studied prior to this project, researchers engaged their paleographic competencies to decipher and interpret the documents. In cases where distempers or names proved difficult to determine, researchers referred to the Nature of Ailments document created by the Northampton General Hospital archivist, historical medical papers, or to Dr. Mann or one another for assistance.
With our project focusing on children's health histories, it is fitting that the first patient to be recorded at the Northampton General Hospital was a 13-year-old girl named Thomasin Grace. Thomasin was admitted to the hospital on March 29, 1744, and was suffering from a condition known as scald head, which today is more commonly referred to as ringworm. It was noted in the records that Thomasin had suffered from this condition since her infancy, suggesting she'd been brought up in an unclean household, something unfortunately very common in 18th century England. Thomasin Grace was recorded as being discharged from the hospital, cured, on the 7th of July after over 3 months in the hospital. Oftentimes, when we find a child recorded in the Northampton General Hospital archives, we wonder what happened next in their lives after their discharge. In the case of Thomasin Grace, we are able to see from a 1762 marriage certificate that she married a man named John Green at the age of 31 years in Shoreditch, London. That certificate shows that her death was in London in 1802 at about 70 years old, which shows that despite her illness as a child, she went on to live a very long life. Discovering life stories like these has been particularly exciting for us, as we are amazingly the first group of people to be transcribing these volumes of the Northampton General Archives. This is an incredible opportunity for us, as we are able to research and discover a part of history for the very first time. This example shows the value of transcribing archives, as we are often able to follow the entirety of a patient's life, providing us with insight into the long-term effects that their illness may have had on their lives. In particular, it is important to focus on archives that shed light on children's health histories, as there are very few records of this from the time period. As a result of this, the Northampton General Hospital archives are a crucial primary source that allows us to have insight into children's health, their medical care, and their family lives during the 18th and 19th century period. And now I will pass it to Maryam to talk about hospitals then and now.
Hospitals as we understand them today are very different from the 18th century hospital environment. In order to get a sense of those differences, let's focus on hospital rules and regulations of the past. In order to be admitted to the hospital, it was necessary to first obtain a letter of recommendation from a hospital subscriber. A subscriber is someone who supported the hospital in exchange for the right to recommend patients. When the patient was discharged from the hospital, they had to give their thanks. The rules show us the types of things which were expected from patients as well. Imagine having to help with cleaning and washing in the wards. Well, these 18th century patients did not have to imagine. Patients who were able to help did so. Patients were also required to attend prayers. They had to behave in a decent manner, and they were not permitted to swear. They weren't allowed to play cards and games, and they could not smoke in the hospital. Most public hospitals today do not come with these religious and moral overtones. So what can we do with this information? This type of data allows us to go in a variety of directions. One example is our ability to make meaningful comparisons, and this has been done by Denny and colleagues in their paper examining diet. These authors compare 18th century and 20th century hospital diets. They debunk the idea that 18th century hospital diets were not nutritious. And they show that nutritional value from contemporary hospital diets will differ based on the choice that the patient makes. These authors note the relevance of the past to present practice. Let's go to Mollie now.
Thank you, Maryam. So it's widely believed that pediatric care was a phenomenon commencing in the United Kingdom in the late 19th century, with the creation of hospitals such as Great Ormond Street in 1852, and formal pediatric wards, such as one built at Northampton General Hospital in 1887. However, with a closer inspection of hospital patient records, it is now known that pediatric care was an informal phenomenon able to be traced back to the mid-18th century. As noted in Child Patients, Hospitals, and Home in 18th century England by Levine et al., the general hospital movement in England began in the mid-18th century with the goal of catering curable cases of illness and injury among working-age adults of the reduced but respectable poor. These hospitals subscribed to a similar set of regulations, including the stipulation that barred children under 6 and sometimes 7 from being admitted, with exceptions in extenuating circumstances, such as surgery. At this time, it was believed that children under 7 were highly infectious and were better managed at home. As early as 1790, though, physicians were calling into question the lack of formal care available for children, as evidenced by Beacon's quotation. This gap in care was soon filled by concerned physicians at a number of hospitals across England. Many children, considered to be those under the age of 13 in Levine et al. Study, were admitted to voluntary general hospitals across England between 1756 and 1779. In 1756, 24.8% of patients at Manchester Infirmary were children, and in 1779, 16.9% of patients at Northampton were children. The majority of these children, as well as those admitted at Bristol, Chester, and Royal Victoria, were not surgical cases, failing to meet the extenuating circumstances clause included in the children's admission rule. Additional details on the Northampton General Hospital are espoused in Williams' 2005 article. Founded in 1744 by Dr. Stonehouse and Dr. Doddridge, Northampton General Hospital was a voluntary establishment whose first patient, as you now know, was a child. In its first year, children as young as 2 years of age were seen as outpatients, and 26% of all patients seen were children. And in Williams' study, children were considered those under the age of 16. Since its establishment, Northampton General Hospital catered to the healthcare needs of people of all ages, taking care of a considerable number of children in a time before the formal establishment of pediatric care. And now I'll speak about the importance of preserving archives. So there's 3 main points that I'll talk about with respect to this topic. So the preserving archives enables and supports academic research. As evidenced by our project, archived primary documents are essential within academic fields such as history and anthropology, to name a few. They allow us a glimpse into the past and provide us with a foundation to counter or further contribute to establish histories and develop novel research questions that have positive implications within contemporary spaces. A second point of preserving archives is serving as repositories of culture and community. Archives invite community members to engage with and learn more about the history of the area within which they reside. Proper preservation and public access is critical to upholding this function of archival preservation. And finally, the preservation of archives serves administrative and governmental accountability. Archival documents allow individuals and institutions to be held accountable to the populations they serve and to one another, as evidenced by Steve Hewitt's Spying 101, which, using published archives, exposes systematic surveillance of students on Canadian university campuses by the RCMP. Reflecting on preserved historical records creates spaces for critical thinking and development of plans for safer and more equitable futures. And now I'll hand it over to Judy for reflections on the research.
Thank you so much, Mollie. I will be talking about our primary research findings. In total, the volunteer archivists of the Northampton Archive have given us the first 5 volumes to transcribe, spanning from the hospital's opening from 1744 to 1774. Currently, as a team, within a month of transcription, we have fully completed the first 3 volumes with documentation of 7,292 unique patients, with close to complete information of their location of residence, their ability to seek, who recommended their ability to seek care, their age, their distemper, how long they were ill before coming into the infirmary, when they left, and when they came into the hospital. Specifically, the first 3 volumes spans years 1744 to 1765, meaning that we as a team have documented 21 years worth of hospital records, starting with the very first patient on March 29, 1744. Since this project mainly focuses upon the bodies, lives, and health of the children coming in and out of the Northampton Infirmary, our primary results show clear documentation of about 1,747 children, which represents 24% of the 7,292 total patients we have transcribed so far. The average age of the patients is about 12 years, with the main distemper being a fever. Such information given to us is essential for further analysis into the project once all the patients have been transcribed. This is because as a team, we can find patterns of how infectious disease, trauma, and accidents might affect the healthy growth and development of a child across their lifespan. I will now hand it over to Bryce to chat about the transcribing experience we have.
All right, thank you again, Judy. One of the main things that we are seeking to analyze as our research progresses is why children are in the hospital in the first place. And of course, in order to do this, one of the most important pieces of information is the distemper or ailment that the patient is suffering from, supplemented by their age as well as the person that recommended them for admission, where they come from, and when and how they were discharged. Distempers could be anything from a problem that has been happening since a patient's birth to a sudden accident. And by examining primarily the distempers of children in the hospital, it will be possible to do research on why they were there and how their stay in the hospital looked. From an anthropological and historical lens, other sources of knowledge of the time period can be used to fill out the scarce information we are gathering from the admissions records. But distempers are most important in this scenario as they give the primary reason why a patient will be showing up to the hospital. And it is for this reason that when we're transcribing and proofreading, we pay special attention to distempers. So our primary research goal, as we've kind of established, is to record this data in order to conglomerate and analyze its results later on. But the process of transcribing reveals a lot about how human this data really is, which is really exciting for me. For instance, it is likely that these 2 patients are 8-year-old twin brothers, and they both had a fever, and they were both cured. And under the ailment for this patient, it is clearly documented that they fell exactly 53 feet from a tree. Yes, we are assuming they measured the tree. And on a page of transcription, probably most important for our specific research on the project, we have seen as many as 9 children documented on a single page, which is incredible because it's like about a month is the page, and it's like there's about 20 patients on the page and half of them are children. That's incredible. And through an anthropological lens, we are not just mapping hospital records, we are mapping human stories. And we hope that as the research project progresses, the manual transcription will show through a viscerally human lens. When formulating research questions, it's these little stories that we're going to formulate them from, no matter how much the data is amalgamated. Because every row of transcription is a unique story in a unique time and place. And by allowing research questions and directions to organically form through this process, the methods we are aiming to create are compassionate and specific. Going through the records is like watching a movie that was produced well before I was born, and realizing the actors, although all deceased, were real people with real lives interacting with the set and techniques, all products of their time, just like Northampton Hospital. Additionally, there are some assumptions that we have needed to make in order to define our research. For example, we've been using patient names in order to determine sex of patients. Though this is much more accurate to use for 18th century names than if we did the same today, it is important to recognize that this still creates limitations. Secondly, the age of children is a very important consideration for our research, because while modern society defines a child as someone under 18, the standard at the time was someone under 13, as that's usually when they were shipped off to an apprenticeship and started working. And children 7 and under weren't even supposed to be in the hospital, yet they were there. It is an important decision what age we choose for what we define as a child, as it will affect the statistics of what we're analyzing, and we have been discussing that perhaps the best method is to split them into cohorts to define and compare contemporary and historical perspectives. And lastly, though we are doing our best to be accurate, as we transcribe, we're constantly making judgments on letters and words based on context. This can affect results and interpretations in minuscule ways, such as the accuracy of surnames or dates. And on that note, I will pass it back to Mollie for the futurities of the project.
Thank you, Bryce. As we mentioned before, we fully transcribed 3 out of the 5 volumes, so we still have a lot of work to go, and along with that, we have some upcoming projects that we'd like to share with you. So we're going to be completing the transcription of the remaining files, and then in early June, we'll be publishing a blog for teaching anthropology, and I'll focus on our reflections as students, dealing with primary sources, being able to work together as a group, and being able to work in person. We'll also be crafting an abstract for our submission to the Society for the History of Children and Youth Biennial International Conference in 2023, which we held just down the road in Guelph. And finally, we'll be conducting critical analysis of the transcribed files once they're complete, whilst developing research questions and focuses to guide the development of our SCHY paper. And I'll now hand it over to Judy to conclude.
Thank you so much, everybody, for listening to our presentation. I would like to extend thanks to the wonderful Dr. Matt for choosing us for this wonderful project. I would also like to extend thank you to Dr. Andrew Williams, who is in the UK, who inspired this project. And we'll take any questions. Thank you so much.